Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, that is the quickest that a group this size has ever really been quiet after just a good afternoon. But it would be nice if you responded, good afternoon. I'm Virginia Clark. I'm the Executive Director of SAFSF, and it's really a delight to be here with all of you in community. I had the opportunity to welcome the funders this morning, so those of you who are here this morning, a couple of the slides will be the same, but for those of you who are just joining us, welcome. We're really happy that you're here. A little bit of background about SAFSF. We're a national network of funders of all types that work to connect, collaborate, and build capacity for change for a just and equitable food system. Just over about 100 members. That number has fluctuated somewhat, but the one exciting thing is that we know of hundreds of other funders and investors who are working in this space who are not connected to us. So not necessarily that all of them have to be members of our organization, but it's really we're really hopeful to be able to connect them to all of you. Just last year, in 2021, our members, so roughly 100 funders, got out $240 million in food and ag work. That's a significant amount of change, but that doesn't include lots of other funders. It doesn't include USDA or state funding. So you know that number is probably I don't even know how many times greater. Our taxonomy includes about 62 different issues. Some of you were here this morning and we're talking about kind of our theme areas of consolidation and concentration, land access, and climate change, and looking forward to hearing the outcomes of those conversations. So who are all of you and who are all of we? We're coming from 14 different kinds of funders, 175 attendees. That does not include all of the many tens of folks that will be meeting out on site visits tomorrow. Just over half are funders. The rest of you are farmers, politicians, agency folks, state, and otherwise some media presence in this room, lots of nonprofit funders, lots of nonprofit attendees. We're really excited. This is our 20th annual. Yep. So quickly, staff, all of you who are here, please stand up. Come on, come on. I don't see everybody, but if any of you have put on events, you know how much work goes into this, and our staff is quite remarkable, and I'm really grateful and honored to get to live with them. I was going to say, we're kind of living together this week, so sometimes it feels like that to work with them. So how you can connect with each other. If you haven't already downloaded the Whova app, I would encourage you to do so because that's how you can connect to each other with attendee lists, the agendas, et cetera. It's a great way. We were joking around last night because somehow by accident I didn't realize that by posting different things I would get to the leaderboard status, but I have been left in the dust and other people are in the leader status, which is just fine. Outside there are several displays, one of yearbook of the forum over time over the last 20 years. It's been really fun to look at those photos. Look at them, enjoy them, add your comments, especially those of you who were there, and those of you who weren't there. But there's also a map for future forums, and we'd really like to hear from you about where we might want to go. Next year is in Washington, D.C. in June, but after that, we're not sure, and we'd really like to hear from all of you. Those of you who tweet, the Twitter channel. Sorry, I got grief after my comment this morning, but I'll leave that alone because I'm not a tweeter. But it's a no pitch and a no attribution zone, so that would be helpful. And also, please remember to mask up. Many of us have loved ones or are ourselves immunocompromised, and so the more we can do to help each other and keep each other safe will be better. Your name tag, pretty self-explanatory. You have a dot. You might have multiple dots. If you're looking for somebody and you want to know how they're related to this, just look at their name tag, but just ask them. Thank you to the sponsors, and here I would like to offer a round of applause. A lot of these folks, a couple of these folks are new sponsors, which is great. Grace Communications and USDA Ag Marketing Services have been working with us for many years, but exciting Missouri Foundation for Health and the Sunflower Foundation are new, and we're really appreciative to have sponsorship from the two states into which we are traveling. And also the workshop sponsors, the networking sponsors, lots of friends. Thank you. We certainly couldn't do this without you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Secretary Mike Beam. I had the opportunity to meet Secretary Beam through the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. SAFSF has been partnering with NASDA over the last 7 years to bring philanthropy and the State Departments of Ag in closer coordination and closer conversation, but also to increase the number of folks who are talking about sustainable agriculture and food systems broadly into those conversations, both at the regional level and at the national level. And Secretary Beam joined us a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019 at this point, when we were initially planning this conference for 2020. He was appointed by the governor in 2019. He has dedicated his career to assisting farmers and ranchers to advance their policy and public relations needs and in building highly visible, responsive, and respected organizations. So, Secretary Beam, I welcome you to the podium and thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. It is indeed an honor to be asked to welcome all of you, and so I'd like to say welcome to Kansas City, welcome to the Midwest. A lot of people are confused about Kansas City. Is it in Kansas or is it Missouri? The answer is yes, but at this point, I think you're on the Missouri side, but we work very closely with others across the line into Missouri, and I have a good working relationships with the folks at the Department of Ag in Missouri. As you probably know, if you did any homework or if you grew up in this area, you realize that this region has a very strong agricultural tradition, a lot of agricultural-related businesses that continue to grow and thrive in this regional economy. It's also become really quite broad and diverse. Obviously, it includes traditional sectors like beef cattle ranching, wheat, corn, soybeans, and dairy. But we consider other aspects or other sectors such as landscape and horticulture services, pet food. The pet food processing in this area is becoming stronger and making a big difference in the world. Farm machinery manufacturing, food processing, of course, is a large sector, but there are many more. For Kansas, on the Kansas side, those agricultural sectors is the largest economic driver with a total contribution of $67 billion to the state's economy. It results in over 12% of the entire workforce in the state of Kansas is related to or involved in those sectors. Agriculture in Missouri also contributes a huge amount. It's $93 billion in the economy. So we've partnered with the Ag Business Council of Kansas City and folks in Missouri for an economic study. But in just the Kansas City region on both sides of the border, there's about almost 99,000 jobs in the greater Kansas City area related to agriculture. So it's the Midwest farmers, particularly in this region, I would say, are constantly making advancements to keep up with the growing demand for food. And we know that demand changes within just a few days, depending on what happens on the international level. And throughout my career, I've noticed particularly recently just how devoted most farmers and ranchers are to sustainability, to the next generation. And that's important because I think the latest USDA census showed that over 85% of our farms are owned by families. And so for them, looking long-term for sustainability, not just of natural resources, but family after family, that's vitally important. I'm also encouraged with the devotion to climate change and sustainability by the folks. I had a chance to look at about a half a dozen recent applications to USDA's Climate Smart grant program. And I must say there was, I think, some very strong, robust applications, and I'm anxious to see who gets those awards and how that progresses. So thank you for what you do. You probably realize it, but I just want to reinforce that you collectively, and of course you individually, do make an impact, a very positive impact to our region's farmers and ranchers, but the future success of those in our food system. So I hope you have a great conference and a great stay here, and make it a point to come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary Beam. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Muller, and I'm with the Regenerative Agriculture Foundation. I am also on the board of SAFSF and served as the chair of the Forum Advisory Committee. First off, I just want to thank everyone for coming to the first forum since 2019. Yeah, give yourself a hand. I have to say, it was really so wonderful this morning. Like, I didn't realize how much I missed you all. So it's so great to see you all again and make many more new friends. And then I want to particularly welcome the food system partners that we have with us. You know, I spent most of my career in the nonprofit space and then went to the funder space, and now I'm kind of in the squishy middle of the intermediary funder. And I think one of the things that's really struck me by doing this work is that money is a crucial component of making change, but is wholly insufficient. And it only makes a difference if we have brilliant ideas and we have a lot of hard work. So thank you to the food system partners to make all of the rest of us in here relevant, because without you, not much is going to happen. So my role here, yes, thank you, food system partners. My role here is largely to give a shout out to people that are providing some of the governance and leadership to help make this happen. So first off, we're going to go to the SAFS board members. And you see here a slide. Could all of the board members that are in attendance right now please stand up? So, thank you. I'm going to give this an impromptu shout out. As Regenerative Agriculture Foundation, we're a very young organization. We're learning a lot. I am learning a ton by being on the board of SAFSF. It is just a wonderfully run organization, staff and board, so thank you for the crash course that I'm getting in this stuff. Secondly, since it has been such a long time since we met in person, there are a lot of board members that have transitioned off. And so if we could have a slide up of those board members. I believe, is Linda Jo in the room? I think Linda is the only one that's here, but she might not be in the room. But I guess if we could give a round of applause to these board members that have transitioned off over the past 3 years. But one of the great things about having board members that transition off is that you get to transition on new board members. And we have 2 new board members with us right now. So could Esperanza and Catherine, if you could both please stand up. Thank you for joining the board. I believe I have done everything I need to do. And the last thing is just to introduce my fellow board member, Olivia Watkins. And Olivia is going to give us a little bit of a conversation about power dynamics in the room as we move forward. Thank you, Olivia.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our annual SAFS conference. Thank you so much for being here, especially in the middle of a pandemic. Shout outs to all the Black people in the room who are here taking time out of Juneteenth. And shout outs to, And shout outs to all the dads as well who took time out of Father's Day. Yep, there's a dad right there. Thank you. So the SAFS board and the staff have really worked hard over the past several years to find ways to acknowledge and transcend the power dynamics that exist between non-funders and funders. We work really hard to create an atmosphere that can be a place of learning and sharing for everyone. We strongly believe that everyone in this room has something to offer and to learn. We strive to create a space where we can break down some of the barriers of power between funders and non-funders. As funders, we need to remember our power and what our non-funder partners are experiencing. It is a great privilege to be a funder. We have the ability to move a significant amount of resources into places that are overlooked by mainstream funding sources. It is also a great privilege to be a non-funder. Non-funders hold an incredible amount of insight into what is happening on the ground in ways that funders cannot hold. Non-funders are living out the values and practices we all believe in and strive for. So how can we combine these two amazing superpowers and create a space where funders are unlocking capital and giving up power, and non-funders feel respected and valued? Here are some tips that my colleagues and I at SAFS and Black Farmer Fund would like to share with you all. For funders, 1, be supportive. For those of you who have invited food system partners or speakers, check in on them, see how they're doing. 2, meet people where they're at. While our organizations and affiliations are important, we're all here because we feel personally committed to doing this work. Who are we behind the name tags? What drew you to this work? Think about the ways that you can center relationships and people's lived experiences. Through this, you may find some meaningful ways you can invest in non-funders that you may not have anticipated. And finally, 3, be mindful of the pressure that your non-funder colleagues may be feeling sitting here with you. The conversations that non-funders will have with you have the weight to change the future of their organizations, their coworkers, and the people they serve. Tips for non-funders. 1, for those of you who have been to this event and have been around this group for a long time, please be supportive and reach out to those who are new to the space. Give them insights and tips. 2, your work is valued in this space. Share it boldly and authentically. And lastly, as TSA would say, if you see something, say something. Please come up to any of the SAFS board or staff if there are any dynamics that made you or others feel uncomfortable. It's important for us as the curators of the space to be aware so we can act to ensure change in the immediate and long term. Without the work that someone else across the table from you is doing, we can't accomplish the big picture food system change we are striving for. We all need each other. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Ryan Tenney. Ryan is a returning generation farmer and owner of Sankara Farm here in Kansas City. He is also an artist and the founder of a community arts organization called AgroArt. Ryan is one of the site visit hosts for our Kansas City Urban Farming Tour tomorrow, small plug. And he is also running a printmaking activity in the foyer this afternoon and on Wednesday. We encourage you to stop by and make a print. For now, Ryan will be giving a brief multimedia presentation on Juneteenth and its intersections with Black agrarianism. Please welcome Ryan Tenney.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Olivia. I just wanted to keep my remarks short. I'm Ryan. Sankara Farm is the farm, and AgroArt is kind of the cultural wing of the agricultural work that we do on the farm. And yes, I'm happy to share a little video creation I made that kind of ties, puts our roots into what Juneteenth, is. It ties in a lot of what we do on the farm, which is recovering land-based practices of African descendant people, of First Nations peoples, our grandmothers and grandfathers with their purple whole peas and raised beds in the back. So, ooh, right on cue. Yeah, go ahead.
Something that was really powerful that I learned recently is that in 1865, when General Sherman met with about 30 Black clergy to find out what it was that they needed after the war ended. They said, and I quote, "We need homes and the grounds beneath them so we can plant fruit trees and say to our children, these are ours."
In their vigilant effort to maintain close contact with Mother Earth, the MOVE members are breaking up the cement of the sidewalk around their property.
But you have to have some kind of standard for your organization here. Yeah, like. You just know, but you are not animals. I mean, why not? I don't want to be personal. Oh, no, wait a minute, why not? See, we are animals because our reference is no different than the reference of animal. There's only one reference, and that's life. That's what MOVE is about, life, truth.
Without grocery stores, a food desert. My mentor, Karen Washington, taught me to use the term food apartheid instead, because a desert is a natural phenomena, and apartheid is a human-created system of segregation that relegates certain people to abundance of resources and others to scarcity. And that's really what we have today because of a legacy of racism, redlining, of unfair zoning, neighborhoods that are quite segregated in terms of access to food.
We should talk about that because there used to be a lot of black farmers in America, and there aren't anymore.
And to top it all off, you ain't through yet. Over 50 you have killed in Mississippi since 1963. That doesn't even begin all of those you have maimed.
And all the other lost lives to police violence in Kansas City.
In a certain sense, enslaved people from Africa were planted in the ground, okay, of the Caribbean islands like a crop. And they were meant to be exploited and cultivated as a monocrop. So that the first monocrop in the Caribbean political economy wasn't sugar.
Again, this is, I think what you're, so on the one hand, there's the plot at the level of a kind of, notion of novelistic structure, right? A story. What it is to, remember, Hannah Arendt says, in order to be a person, you have to have a story, right? So some of the implotment that Sylvia Winter is talking about is what it means to enter into the condition in which it is possible to have an individual story, right? And she talks about it specifically, I think, as a modality of humanization or of rehumanization. That when you have a plot, when you have a story, okay, you are no longer a crop, right? You are no longer that which was planted and grown in this new land, but you become, capable of a certain kind of agricultural, activity and insurgency. Okay? That folds into what it means to be functioning within the general framework of a certain notion of economic man. And it seems to me that Winter understands the intensity of the double edge of this, right? That to be folded into, to have a story, you're folded into the old story. You're folded into the old story of what makes one a historical being. And
just a minute ago, what does Juneteenth mean to you? If you would quickly tell us what it's meant to mean, and then indeed what it does mean for you and your interpretation of Black history and history of America in general.
It certainly does not mean the lie that's often spread, that's quite popular, that it's the day that the ignorant slaves in Texas received word that they had been freed on January 1, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation had to be enforced. And so Juneteenth means to me that Texas has been brought back in the Union, that it has been enforced. And so Juneteenth is the end of a military campaign.
What this requires then is the necessity of something like what one might call a plan, and then that's where plot comes in. That this is, that all of this, that this implotment is happening within the general framework of an insurgency against the normative story. Right? And how do you, it's an ongoing problematic. It's the plot of the people who have no plot. Mm-hmm. you know.
It's a conspiracy without a plot.
The conspiracy without a plot. You know, you know, what it means to hold and share land outside the framework of a certain sort of normative ownership of it, right? It's the you know, the sort of, you know, the groundedness, so to speak, of the displaced, right? Spelled D-I-S space P-L-A-C-E, the way Norvesi Phillips spells it. You know, so what's at stake is the, you know, the politics or sort of non-politics, a radical sociality of displacement. You know, placement spelled P-L-A-C-E/M-E-A-N-T, the way Baraka spells it. Right? And you know, the ones whose statement concerning their spatio
I don't know why that happened. Give me just a moment.
I apologize for the technical difficulty. There is a little bit more to that video. It is playing on a loop out in the foyer, and at the printmaking activity, you know, you can view the rest. Also, if you're on the farm tour tomorrow, you know, I'll have it accessible. I'm trying to think of what was else in the video. A little bit more about Juneteenth and you know, the movement of the Union Army down to Texas, and a lot of beautiful visuals of folks on the farm. You know, but thank you.
Thank you. That was powerful. I absentmindedly did not give a shout out to the Form Advisory Committee. Could the Form Advisory Committee members please stand up? So these are people that some local, some around the country that really kind of helped put this together, working with the incredible SAFS staff, Susie and Aaron in particular, who did a remarkable job in moving this forward, and we kind of provided our 2 cents once in a while. But it was a great committee. I have to say, like, I got to know everyone through the Zoom screen square, and so it's great to see people in person, actually. And then, speaking of which, my role up here right now is just to introduce one of those advisory committee members, Elizabeth Berger, who's a senior program officer at the Sunflower Foundation. So she's working on health conversion foundation for the state of Kansas, and is fascinating talking about her work with rural communities. In particular, one of the exciting fact about Elizabeth is that she's a volunteer firefighter, which gets to know people in a much different way. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit as we bring our wonderful speakers up on stage. Thank you for the nice introduction. I do like to mention that I am a rural firefighter because those of us in philanthropy, right, our work is always, we think upstream, we think systems change. We're often up here, right? You can't get much more downstream than being a first responder in a rural community. I only mention this because I feel like it's really a privilege to be able to sort of work in that whole circle, and it gives me even more respect and admiration for the people we have on the stage that are also working at the very immediate ground level to solve the problems that we're trying to solve in the world today. Welcome to Kansas. I'm sorry to be redundant, or Kansas City, I'll say it again.
Here's your driver.
To click the slides? Okay, I'll pass it back and forth. Okay, you made me the driver. That's a little scary. I made it here in record time today. Welcome to Kansas City, the Show Me State, the Sunflower State, the Flyover States, the Big Square States. We got it all here. We are really honored and happy that you took the time to brave the airport traffic, the flight delays, the high gas prices, to come here in the middle of the country and get to know us a little bit more than what you might see from a little airplane square window or what you hear on the news about crazy politician shenanigans. The Sunflower Foundation serves as a catalyst to improve the health and well-being of Kansans. So it seems really fitting that I get to help lead and time with my phone. So that's, you know, none of us use our watches anymore. I get to lead and time this conversation, which I think will be a catalyst to some great discussion and reflections over the next 2.5 days as you learn about work from around the country and then especially happening right here in the region. I'm not going to spend any more time talking, and I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves, and they'll tell you a little bit about their work, their connection to this land, and then we'll have a good conversation until 3 o'clock or until we get pulled off the stage. So I'm going to hand this over to you first, Brett, and apparently you can just click it to let your visuals go.
Yeah, well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone for joining us. I know, as she noted, it takes a lot to move around the world these days, and just really appreciate you all coming and joining us here along the confluence of the Kansas River and the Missouri River, which, if you have a moment, that's where I stopped before I came here today. Is my last stop and first stop before arriving was a park just called Point Park. It's about a mile or two as a crow flies west and a little bit north of here. And it's a place that I always try to return to every time I come back to Kansas City. And of course, you know, the Kansas River, you know, it's borrowing its name from the Kaw people, the Kansa Nation, and the Missouri River borrowing its name from the Missouri tribe, which is now known as Otos, Missouri, and they're actually a close relative of my tribe, the Iowa. We are linguistic relatives, and we share a lot of common origin stories as well. So me, you know, my family, we're from. If you go to that confluence and you just hang a right, I guess if you're coming from here, go upstream about 80 miles or so, and you'll come to a little boat ramp in the town of White Cloud, Kansas. And from that point, our reservation.
Interference on your mic, would you mind using a handheld?
Yeah, so if you were to go upstream from here, about 80 miles on the Missouri River, or the Nishuje River in our language, you'll come to where our current reservation is at. That's where my mom's family is from, so I'm Iowa or Bakoje. That's where we've been since about late 1800s, which I'll get to briefly in a moment. But then my father's family is also from that general area, from a smaller non-native community as well, called Robinson, Kansas. So both farmers in what's now northeast Kansas on both sides of my family. And so I think for me, my work is a result of that, kind of being at the edges of a lot of things. So I'm edges of the identities I hold, edges of often living in cities and rural areas simultaneously often, which is the case now. But ultimately my work ends up being around kind of that edge or intersection of the health of people being intimately tied to the health of our lands. And so that's kind of at the crux of everything that I do, both as my work as a climate resilience planner for my tribe, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and through some of the work that I am fortunate to do with Regenerative Ag Foundation through their Restoring Regenerative Ag initiative. And so just to give a little bit, this image kind of speaks to, in ways, kind of our cosmology. So these are rivers right there, more from where we were prior to our removals, multiple removals to where we are now. The river on the right side, that's Nitanga, so that's also known as the Mississippi River. And so then the one flowing into it is the Yellow River, and that's around effigy mounds, so extreme northeast of what's now Iowa, the state that bears our name. And so my family is generally from that area. Our tribe is roughly as far north as the Minnesota River Valley, whereas the present-day Twin Cities area, Dakota territories, all the way down to here. So west of the Mississippi River, north of the Missouri River, south of the Minnesota River, generally. And so for me, I think about how we have always been edge people as well, living on the edge of what were the eastern woodlands to what was the tall grass prairie, neither of which are in the state that they were prior to colonization. But nonetheless, that is who we are as a people, and we still retain that identity of being both prairie and woodlands people. And so I think that speaks a lot to how we also engage with our food system. We're both agricultural. We were always agricultural, but we also participated in bison hunts as well, and all the things that we, that come along with living a semi-nomadic agrarian lifestyle. And so when it comes to, our bison, this is from a good friend and mentor of mine named Reuben Iron Horse Kent. So he's Buffalo Clan, and for us, Buffalo are the people that brought us corn. So without them, we wouldn't have corn, and as far as our stories go, nobody else would either. And I think in some ways that could even include what we now consider corn today as we look at the vast oceans of monocrop corn throughout the Midwest. And so Reuben, he was one of my first teachers around a lot of our planting practices that we're reclaiming, and a woman had approached him saying, hey, I know it's about time to plant, right? It's about time to plant. I got my seeds, I got my ground tilled up, I got my rows going, ready to go, and now what? And that's how we do it, right? And Reuben kind of responded, he's like, yeah, you can do that, that's all right. There's some efficiencies around planting in rows. I do it myself sometimes. But traditionally, and what many of us still try to do, is plant in mounds. And so part of that is that if you're planting in mounds, the plants grow up together and they're stronger together, versus if you're planting things in rows, they're just individuals. And they're standing there as individuals, and you're much easier to get knocked down if you're an individual versus if you're standing together in a mound with your people. And he also said, because corn is social in that way, they like to gossip and kind of see what the corns on the mound over, what they're doing, So that's kind of how Reuben talks about it. And then we kind of can relate that to ways in which those ways have been largely attempted anyway to be eradicated. And so with the invent of the missions, the boarding schools, northwest of here, not only did they have us sit in rows to teach Western style education, but along with that came this idea of planting in rows. Along with that came that idea of individualism. Along with that came the idea of standing up together as individuals versus being in that collective unit as our corns were. And so being an agricultural mission, which was by nature what it was set up to do, it was to instill Western style agricultural practices into our people as well as the Sac and Fox. It was a complete worldview shift, right? It wasn't just under the guise of like, oh, we're going to help these people teach corn, or teach these people to grow corn. It was much more deep and I would say sinister than that. It was to completely circumvent our worldview that understood our relationships to each other and the lands that we were commonly in charge of taking care of together. And so we still see that today. Some of you may join us tomorrow on our trip, and you'll get an opportunity to see what this looks like now today. So we are still on the edges of reclaiming a lot of those foodways that were intentionally eradicated after our removal from actually what's now Northwest Missouri. So anybody who flew into Kansas City Airport yesterday, that land was taken through a treaty in 1837 from both us and the Sac and Fox. So it's safe to say that opportunity to fly into Kansas City Airport was made possible by our removal. And the mission that was set up immediately following that then set the stage for an industrial agricultural system, not just for my people, but ultimately for the entire landscape here. And so my work now is about reclaiming those intersections, those connections between what were our traditional practices and those relationships that came along with them, and ultimately for the betterment of everyone and everything. And so that's kind of what my work with Restoring Regenerative Ag gets to do. That's what my work with the Iowa Tribal National Park, which is what this images of, seeks to do, is to reinstate those ethics and values and understandings of the collective nature needed in order to actually move forward the health of everyone and everything.
Thank you, Brett. That was beautiful. And we appreciate the reminder and acknowledgement that the land that so many people flew in on was made possible by that. That's a sober acknowledgement we all need to remember, so thank you. Miss Donna Pearson McLeish, one and no other. Please tell us your story.
Good afternoon. I'm Donna Pearson McLeish, CEO of Common Ground Producers Mobile Market and Mobile Food Hub. Our headquarters is in Wichita, Kansas. And basically what we do is move food to where it needs to go to provide healthy, accessible food to everyone. And we're rebranding, so we have a new logo. Our motto is all are fed, no one is hungry. This is what we do. We set up at several senior sites. We go to the seniors. They use their senior market vouchers, SNAP, EBT, all forms of payment. And the top left is a normal delivery day at the senior site. They're lined up, ready to go when we get there. So we lay out we gather all of the food, fresh picked in the morning from our network of growers. We put it in the truck, and we make several rounds during the day. So the top left is we are at one of our first stops, and you see the seniors in all of the pictures. They do not have transportation in the urban area to get to farmers markets to use their food vouchers or to access fresh produce. I live in Wichita, Kansas, and we have more than 50 square miles of food desert, food apartheid, however you want to call it. We have no grocery stores in those areas within 1 mile of the residents. They cannot walk, ride the bus. They have no accessibility to fresh produce. So what we do is move produce to those areas. On the bottom left is my grandson. He and I started the market in 2014. He and I were the only ones doing the market, lifting, loading, and now I have several staff. We have several vans that deliver. We're expanding into Sedgwick. We serve Sedgwick, Harvey, Butler, and have expanded into Saline counties in Kansas. So COVID uncovered the layers of food equity. And we found that not only was there not food available, but there wasn't good food available. So what we did was, that was our first year to serve our customers year-round. We moved 33,000 pints of chocolate milk. The dairy overproduced, schools were closed. They call us when people have food. They call us and say, can you move this food for us? And we never turn it down. So we're constantly on the go, and we're constantly living out our mission. We connect the dots. We are a community of growers. I am an urban farmer. Generationally, we have an urban farm in Wichita, Kansas, 40 acres. My brother is the farm manager, and everyone that comes can work. All hands on deck. We are intergenerational farmers. We provide opportunities for our inner city youth to work with us each year, and we teach them, and this is a picture of two of the youth working. We teach them entrepreneurship, social skills, math, science, all the STEAM areas. They get to learn from farming. Farming teaches you everything about all of those areas. We provide fresh vegetables and produce that's accessible to all, and our goal is healthy senior citizens and healthy communities. Urban farming is growing or producing food in a city or heavily populated town or municipality. This is an article the Hutchinson News did over our family, and that's my brother on the tractor. He says that's all he wants to do is drive the tractor and plant. You can do all the other stuff, and I said, okay. And so last month, we got a generous donation, and he got a new tractor with all the implements. So, yes, he's happy. He's very happy. So we deliver produce to Kansas seniors, low-income families, individuals. People call us. They said, can we be a part? Can we get on your list? And now we're looking at the difference between buying gas and buying food. So the necessity of moving good food is right on us. It weighs on us heavily as we decide who we serve, how many people we can serve. So we're going to get it done. We're going to get it done. Everybody's going to be fed. And there are many ways that we can do that together. All of us have good ideas, and we put those ideas together, and we can get this food system re-envisioned and turned around for the United States and for the world. So we're thinking globally. How do we model, how do we develop a model that can be duplicated globally across the world? So we're in this community resilience hub space with several universities, and we know that we have to have agriculture, we have to have community, and we have to have education. So those three segments are coming together so we can begin, excuse me, to impact communities, not just giving them food, but teaching them how to get food. Because giving is gonna go out. I mean, you can only give out so much freely, but if there's a saying that if you teach them the fish, instead of giving the fish, then you've made an impact on the community. So we want to teach them to grow, teach them to preserve, teach them to know what good food looks like. So that's one of our main goal, is to teach communities and reach communities and teach them what good food looks like. Our focus is urban farming, growing food. And let me tell you about our network of growers. We reduce farmer food miles. And if that doesn't sound familiar, when farmers grow for us, they don't have to go to the farmer's market. We load the food, we buy the food from them. They don't have to go to the farmer's market, and they don't have anything left over to take home, or what do I do with it? They can call Donna or Randy or Keisha or one of the staff, and we can pick up the food. We pay them an equitable wage. I strongly believe that farmers have to be paid for what they do in order for them to survive. So we pay them an equitable wage. We work with socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers on educational and technical assistance, and we have intergenerational farming with our community youth and families. Oh, there's Rhonda. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Donna. And what Donna is way too modest to share is that just this morning she learned that she and her family farm won the Kansas State University Master Farmer of the Year Award for 2022. And crossing the state line, or I guess I keep forgetting, apologies, that we are in the Show Me state. I did not know Rhonda personally before this, but I Googled her a lot before doing this plenary, and you are an amazing woman. So tell us a bit about the Missouri Rural Crisis Center.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Missouri. It is always frightening when someone says they have Googled you
I know.
a lot. We're wrong on so many levels. That just makes me want to skip right by this slide. Oh no, wrong way. Uh-oh. If you Googled me, you would know I'm very bad at technology. Okay. I'm Rhonda Perry. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and we're a statewide farm and rural organization. And this is one of the roads that I get to drive on every day to work. I work out of our office in Columbia, which is right in the center of the state, and then our work is all over the state. I'm also really good at making little like arrows and maps and things that are super complicated. This is actually Highway 240. It's very windy, curvy, and beautiful. It's in Howard County, and I am a 5th generation livestock and grain farmer. I currently live in Howard County. The 4 generations of farmers before me actually lived in Livingston County, which is about an hour and a half northeast of here. My great-great-grandpa, Thomas Jefferson Perry, they came up with such good names back then, where they just like, there was nothing unique at that point in time. Moved to Livingston County with his family in 1887, and every generation stayed there except me. I broke the mold and moved far away, 3 counties away to Howard County. I became involved in this incredible work and what became my journey, my really life's journey for the last 31 years, because my parents were actually founding members of the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. Back in 1986, in Little Livingston County, Missouri, they were just farming. Everybody was just trying to get along. I would say they were pretty typical of farmers in Livingston County. They tended to be conservative. They worked hard. And then the 80s hit, and then farm foreclosures were happening. Like hundreds a minute farmers were being foreclosed on, illegally in most cases and in many cases. And my parents came together with hundreds, really what ultimately became thousands of their neighbors, and organized what may still be the longest USDA protest in history, 145-day protest outside the USDA office protesting illegal foreclosures. As you may remember, although I see there is a lot of young folks in this crowd, so I feel very happy about that, but you also may not remember totally the 80s. It was a super heady time in some ways, sort of like this. There was a lot of anger in rural America. Clearly people were being foreclosed on by the government, and everything they had worked for their entire lives was being wiped out, really through no fault of their own, but because one day their land is worth $1,000 an acre, and one day their land is worth $200 an acre, and those notes were being called in by the government, and farmers were being literally forced off their farms. What my parents, and who is now my husband, who was the executive director of the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, knew even then is farmers were never going to win justice in isolation from the rest of society. So what they did was built relationships in that little town, who they brought in, organized labor, the black churches from Kansas City, the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, Farm Aid. John Mellencamp didn't hurt. That was fun, thanks to Farm Aid. Jesse Jackson. Like, it was an opportunity to talk about, it wasn't just about farmers who were up against it. It was how we were all up against it through a system that made that happen and made that real. We did everything from protests to policy campaigns to building literally what became the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, to emergency food distributions that demonstrated that the farmers who were growing the food couldn't even afford to go to the grocery store and buy the food. That food cooperative program that we started as an emergency food program still exists today and serves hundreds of families every month. And this is 37 years later, so it goes to show what building an organization can do and the power it can have. Ultimately, all these years later, Missouri Rural Crisis Center has grown and now has 5,000 farm and rural member families across the state, where all those little arrows are pointing. My arrow doesn't work. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I've been with MRCC for 31 years. I've been the director for a few years and was the policy person before that. I'm gonna talk briefly about this, but really I want to skip this and move on to sort of how we do our work. But a couple tidbits about Missouri that people should know. We have the second largest number of family farms in the country after only Texas. Who would have thought? Who knew that? Nobody knows this. It's incredible. We also have the second largest number of cattle operations of any state in the country after only Texas. We frequently have the second largest number of cattle produced. Sometimes Oklahoma gets ahead of us, but basically that's what Missouri looks like. We also have substantially smaller number of acres per farm than the average. The average is over 400 acres per farm here in Missouri. We tend to have small, diversified family farms like mine. I have cattle, I have row crops. We have a lot of cow-calf operations. That's what Missouri, that's our backbone really. And Missouri agriculture is almost always the #1 industry in our state. At Missouri Rural Crisis Center, we do things that are sort of in threes. I like that you were using threes, Donna. Like, it really strikes me. We have to do everything in threes, and everybody says if there's not 3 things, Rhonda just makes things up, so there are 3 things. The way we really do our organizing fits into 3 big buckets on transforming power. We call it the 3 faces of power. And that includes campaigns. I am so blind that I can't even really read that. It's a good thing I know it. Impacting campaigns. It says political, but really what we mean by that at MRCC is all campaigns, whether they're issue campaigns, whether they're campaigns to make sure food gets to hungry people. We have a campaign. Well, this campaign is a program of ours called Patchwork Family Farms that for the last 27 years we have bought hogs from family farmers that we market really all over the state to grocery stores and restaurants who really understand the importance of family farm-raised food. But it also includes campaigns about concentration and competition and all of the issues that really affect our base of people that we work with in particular. Transforming the narrative. That's how we talk about how we need to play in the arena of narrative. We need to bring our values and the values of our people and what brings us to this work into everything that we do. And I think we really focus right now on changing the narrative from one that's about scarcity and about who's at fault and about it has to be someone else's fault that this is the situation in rural America, to one about this has to be about all of us and it has to be about how we all suffer and are exploited under the corporate food system that we currently have. And finally, it's about building organizational capacity. It's about how do we build leaders, how do we build a future organization that's going to be sustainable and be around forever. It's about building power, it's about building collaborations and coalitions, and it's about creating organized money in ways that are going to impact all the work that we all do together. This last slide is just a collage that sort of demonstrates all the different kinds of work that we do. Mostly, again, 3 strategies that we use to sort of guide how we do our work. Number 1, always organizing around issues that matter to rural people, that make a difference in their lives. It's the things that keep them up at night. It's the things they talk about when you talk to them. These are the things they're going to tell you about, from clean air and water to healthcare to corporate concentration to having access to affordable food or not, to having access to services for seniors. Secondly, directly identifying corporate power and the role that it plays, lifting up pro-democracy frames always, and making sure everyone is in, no one is out. And thirdly, being explicit about racial justice in our work in all of these arenas, whether it's about fighting factory farms, whether it's about engaging youth and learning to grow food, learning to cook food, whether it's standing up to corporate power. Some of these pictures are in churches who came through for us clear back in the 1980s when they actually were fearless and they came out to places like Chillicothe, Missouri, and those ministers stood up to literally the police in riot gear who were at that point taking out family farmers. And that picture is not lost on us today as we think about our work and what that means and building these relationships that matter for the long haul. So thanks for coming to our state. It's an incredible place, and hopefully through our conversation today, you'll learn a little bit more about the people of Missouri and how we work together.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. So if you also were to Google these 3, you'd find that each have such an extraordinary depth and breadth of knowledge in their areas that we could do literally a Terry Gross fresh air interview with each one of them for several hours. We just have 30 minutes left, so I'm going to ask some pointed questions to each one of you, sort of zeroing in on an area you've already touched on, but we'd like to dig a little deeper. Brad, if you don't mind, I'll look to you first. What I have always found fascinating when I've heard you speak is when you talk about agriculture, you talk about the entire ecosystem. And sometimes the food production part is not even part of that ecosystem. Or it is part of the ecosystem, but it's just one part. Whereas so many of us think of food production is the means to the end and the end to the means. Can you just talk a little bit more about this holistic view of the ecosystem that you speak to?
Yeah, sure. So I think to do this, I'm going to take us back to that confluence over here. And instead of going upstream the Missouri to White Cloud, we're going to go upstream to Lawrence on the Kansas River. And once we get to Lawrence, that's also the home of Haskell Indian Nations University, which I believe some of you will be coming with us on Thursday to visit there. And what Haskell was initially intended to be was one of those assimilation boarding schools set up by the federal government under the auspice that maybe you've been familiar with over time around the killing the Indian to save the man. So that was the whole premise of Haskell, which is one of the more hardcore assimilation boarding schools, agriculture being one of the primary things that were being taught. So I went to school there, and on the far south edge of campus there's some wetlands. And during our classes, whether it was biology classes, American Indian Studies classes, English classes, we would go out there and utilize that landscape as part of our teaching. And so one of the things that we would do is we would harvest plants for medicine, we'd harvest plants for food. We'd go and observe the monarchs coming through there for their food. It was a big stop-off point on their migrations, both north and south. And so what that ground was was a place for both resurgence of those knowledges and relationships to land that were intentionally sought to be eradicated by Haskell. And it also became a place of learning how to the need to constantly fight to protect those areas. In that case, there was a 6-lane superhighway that was proposed to go through it. And so in that way, there was never an opportunity to separate the health of that ecosystem and the health of our human communities, nor was there a way to separate the health of the monarchs as they were migrating through. And so for me, that was one of the more direct examples of ways in which these areas, in that case wetlands, in the state of Kansas especially, they were considered waste areas. Like they can't be plowed or tilled, planted corn, therefore they're not valuable. And what I think we're seeing now is we're seeing the impacts on the water quality. We have virtually 0 wetlands left in Douglas County, Kansas, except for that little patch there. And so what also ties into that is this idea of wilderness that has been a myth perpetuated by a lot of the heroes of Western conservation like John Muir and others that completely erased indigenous peoples from those landscapes in lieu of this idea of this untouched, pristine wilderness, which then made it easier to justify our removal and genocide in order to make way for, say, Yellowstone or Yosemite. And what also that does is it also minimizes that we have always maintained these areas, often for food production. So berry bushes, wetlands, all these areas, as far as I understand it, were our original community gardens, right? Maybe not cultivated to the eye as it's considered now because there's not a plow, there's not the various implements, but nonetheless, these areas have been taken care of and maintained for food for humans, but also for the health of other relations as well. And so I think that's one thing that we can offer as Indigenous people is that understanding that we actually can't separate out any longer the health between the broader lands and all of the relatives that call those places home and the health of our own human communities. So that separation that places like Haskell, places like the mission I mentioned, where we were taken to northwest of here, that was that worldview that was put in place, and really it's to everybody's detriment if we allow that to persist, if we allow that separation between farmland, wildland, rural, urban, like all these binaries that are created and perpetuated through Western constructs and thinking, those are actually very detrimental to everyone and everything. And so what can we learn from the land herself, right? From the ecosystems if we're only able to slow down and listen. And who better to help guide those teachings and help us better see the teachings those lands offers than the Indigenous peoples who know those lands best. And so that's kind of where I go when we're talking about food systems, is like that necessity of incorporating the health of all these various ecosystems, from the prairie to the woodlands to the wetlands to the riparian areas to the farmed, more deliberately and visibly cultivated areas, and consider those all being part of one thing and no longer allowing this compartmentalization to flood through our minds and our thinking about how we view ourselves in relationship to these places.
Thank you. Very, very well put. I love the image of a community garden, the very first community garden. Donna, speaking of community gardens, you tend to many a garden with the farmer network you work with. You have 2 core tenets in your work. Now, I know you had 3, but I'm going to just address 2 here. And one is that no one goes hungry, everyone is fed. But also, you mentioned this, you want to make sure every farmer is paid an equitable wage.
Yes.
So how do you thread that needle? Because you're not taking the farmer food to Whole Food, not slamming Whole Food, but just giving an example where you're making sure it's still affordable. How do you do that?
It can be difficult at times. When we purchase food from our farmers, we pay them an equitable wage for their labor. We understand what it takes to plant, cultivate, harvest on a daily basis. Many of you may not be aware that the average farmer makes 14 cents on a dollar of the produce that they provide for us. So it's important to common ground to bring the farmer up in the social economy, so they don't have the stressors, they don't have the, money is a big issue. Money is very important in our society. And without an equitable wage, farmers cannot feed their families, as Ron has alluded to. They cannot pay for insurance. They cannot service their equipment. They can't buy new equipment. Our parents bought the farm 1968. We've been farming for 54 years. This is the first time we've had a new tractor. So it's those kinds of things that when you get into the gardening and the farming part of it, is you begin to see it. And I just want to make a comment right quick. All three of us on this stage have something in common. We have all, our segments of society in our lives have all encountered someone trying to stop or extinct or bring to naught what we do. The rural farmer, the African American farmer, the urban farmer, and the indigenous people. So we have something in common, and that's a common thread that we can use to our advantage. I just wanted to say that while it was on my mind. But when we go through when we pay our farmers, somebody has to absorb the cost in the middle, because we believe strongly that all are fed and no one is hungry. If someone comes to the market stand and they don't have any money, they do not leave empty-handed. We can say, one day a young gentleman came and he said, I don't have any money. And I said, are you a first-time person at the market? This is your day. Go ahead and pick out what you want to eat. The next time he came, he brought some change. He said, I just wanted to give you something for what you gave me. But we have to, the dignity of who we serve is important. Our farmers, we have to restore the dignity to our farmers. We have to restore the dignity and maintain dignity to our end customer. So yes, we absorb a lot of the cost in the middle. How do we do that? We're very blessed. For 8 years, we've been carrying on. We have donors, we have foundations, and people that support us, but it's a big part of our budget, how we're going to pay our farmers and keep our prices affordable to our customer. But we've been able to do it, and we will continue to make those two things very important to what we do.
And Donna, again, so well said, and I often think after I talk to you, those of us in philanthropy around food systems will know we've done our job when there's no longer a need for external support for work like yours, where the system writes itself. Yes, yes. Finally, right? When will that day come? Rhonda, your work particularly touches on so many of the unseen aspects of the food system, right? Now, COVID did reveal to the general public maybe a little bit more, and with the meat supply chain, people begin consolidation. What is that? That's a thing. Consolidation has made food cheaper on the grocery shelves, but someone is paying a price. Can you speak to the social justice aspects of your work?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think COVID didn't even just expose a little here or there. If we were looking, it exposed the entire system for what it was.
Pulled the scab right off.
Totally, complete fragility, complete inability to be resilient, the control of corporations in terms of agriculture and food. It showed not only the fragility of the corporate food system, but what centralized power does. And people don't always think about the food system being centralized. We got all these choices. You go to the grocery store and you're like, oh my God, there's Cheetos and Cheetos Light, and they're it's
Flamin' Cheetos.
It's disturbing. all the kinds of Cheetos. So sometimes we don't think about how centralized this food system is, and how very much controlled by just a few corporations, and how if in a single situation like COVID, it could become so clear how frighteningly on the edge we are, even though those of us who have been doing this for a long time have been saying this for a long time, but this is what it took for some people to actually see it. The power they had to manipulate consumer prices and prices paid to producers, the power they had to force workers to come back to work in completely unsafe working conditions. I mean, that is power like I think most people didn't really realize was present in our food system. I think what we saw in terms of things like beef producers, and you could see the price of beef went skyrocketing high, if you can even get it in your grocery store. Simultaneously, a place like Missouri, where again it's mostly cow-calf operations, what we saw was we went from being able to, if you had 100 head of cows, your family could make $51,000 in a year. In 2020, if you had 100 head of cows, your family could make $8,500 in a year. And when you consider who paid for that, farmers paid for those corporate profits. Of course, these packers declared record profits in almost all of the quarters of COVID. And you can see farmers, I wrote down about the 14 cents on every dollar of the produce farmers league. That's what we're really up against all across the food system, with the folks in between making record profits and workers being literally devastated in terms of not just unsafe working conditions, but their pay and the threats that they have every day. I would say one other thing that COVID did, which was good, it also gave us a reason to talk about how we are all literally being screwed by this food system, and that it exists solely because it can exploit people at every segment of the food system. And that brought us at Missouri Rural Crisis Center, a bunch of our leaders came together, which resulted in a whole team of 25 of them actually like really coming together and creating a whole new program called the Justice Crossroads Program, which was all about how do we tell the story, going back to the threesome, how do we tell the story that changes the narrative, that says we are all in this together and we all will benefit from changing this system. Number two, how do we come together on those policies and campaigns? And number three, how do we build even more power by building collaborations between white farmers, black farmers, fast food workers, workers in those packing plants, and consumers? And so far, just since we started this program in 2021, over 1,000 people have participated in it thus far. Hundreds of them are right here in Kansas City at the Metropolitan Community College, where we're like bringing youth into these conversations about what has to change. And I think what we know, some things that have to change, is we have to have fair wages for workers, fair prices for farmers, which we've heard several times. We have to stop subsidizing with our taxpayer dollars this corporatized system. We have to enforce the antitrust laws that we have on the books that break up this kind of power that clearly is not working for anyone. And I think we got a good start with the executive order that President Biden put out, but now we need real action on that, and we need it really soon, because people are suffering at all levels of the food chain. And I would say now is the time to join forces to an even greater degree and even more strategically, and in ways that are really going to build power for the future for everyone in the food system.
Thank you, Rhonda. Well said. So I'd like to, real briefly, Donna and Brett, if you have, Rhonda talked about some of the opportunities that came from COVID. Do you have any thoughts on, jump right in.
Oh, so many opportunities. It's an opportunity for farmers to come back to where they were years ago when farmers fed their communities. It's an opportunity for us to involve the farmer in all aspects of food. When you have healthy farmers, you have healthy food, you have healthy communities, and people can work. And there's a health factor. There's social determinants of health that we need to target.
But when we get the farmer back to where he does what he loves to do, we're going to have food moving along that chain. And when we get community involved, which we have, now that people are more aware of what's going on, and I'll give you an example. We were in Salina the other day, and I was talking to the senior center director, and I was enlightened. I'm familiar with food access and all of those issues, but she said from her senior center, they are now experiencing seniors in the rural areas that don't have enough food, and when they deliver their Meals on Wheels, they're sharing the food with their pets. So they are feeding their pets, and they may or may not be eating nutritious food. That was enlightening to me. In America, that should not be. We should not have to decide whether someone eats or not. Our seniors and our children are our most vulnerable populations, so we target those two segments and their families. In Wichita, Kansas, in the Midwest, in one of the zip codes we serve, 67214, it is the poorest zip code in the state of Kansas. So we have begun to target our resources, more resources into that area. So when we see an area of greater need, we target those areas and then come back to those that don't need as much. But there is an opportunity for us to come together just like we're together in this room. And I really am just thankful that, first of all, that you invited me. Secondly, that I learned about this organization, but thirdly, that you saw the vision and the foresight to come together to say, let's do what we need to do in order to make this system better.
Now, I'm going to confess, Brett and I already shared that we want the opportunity to be a little slower, like we were during COVID, to come back. But expound a little more on your thoughts, Brett. COVID.
Yeah, so the two primary communities that I operated within during COVID was one, what became my virtual community of the Castanea Fellowship. So I was able to participate as a steering committee member, but also got to help co-design, co-facilitate some of the virtual, what became virtual learning immersions with the Castanea Fellows, which I imagine many of you are familiar with them, but I was held by that community through a lot of it, virtually as best we could, but still, having opportunity to interact and engage and learn what's happening in the various pockets of the food system and the various geographies that everybody came from. And then after we jump off those calls, at my physical community, what at that time was in the Twin Cities area, and I got to work out of the Gatherings Cafe at the American Indian Center, providing elders meals. So kind of, Donna noted, we start with the most vulnerable, most in need, and in that case, just had the privilege to be able to jump in with that kitchen, and for 5-6 days a week for the duration, we're able to kick out about 200 to 250 meals a day for elders, utilizing foods from area farms, from area food shelves, from backyard gardens, like wherever. It was just coming in from different areas, and we, 6 or 7 of us would show up and we'd assemble the meals. We had a delivery team of 6, 7 different drivers with different routes all over the cities. And we would just make sure people were getting fed, right? And so we did that for a couple months. And then, a day in early June, late May, there was the murder of George Floyd. And so then we needed to pivot a little bit. So we shut down what became that daily meal site for the elders, delivery only. And then we pivoted to emergency food supplies for whoever needed it, right? And so that would happen during the day, and about 3 or 4, a subset of us would go and we'd prepare a meal to then go take to the native-owned coffee shop, Powwow Grounds, to feed the AIM Patrol, the American Indian Movement Patrol, who was doing nightly patrols. AIM themselves founded off a lot of police violence towards Black and brown communities in the Twin Cities, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. And so we were able to support them and feed them as they were going and protecting the community. And you could look at a Google map in real time as you're watching Unicorn Riot live feed till 3 in the morning, making sure everything was relatively okay. And there was a circle around the Franklin Ave corridor where the AIM patrol was, where there was nothing showing up on that Google map. There were no fires, no white nationalist sightings, none of it, because they had that intact system in place for the past 50 years of how to take care of each other, how to monitor the community and make sure that everybody was safe. So between that and figuring out ways to feed people, feeding elders, native elders, but also there are a lot of non-native elders that lived within native housing communities that were also being fed, because that's what we do as native people. We take care of everyone around us in our community. And so for me, that just illustrated this future building, this ongoing and post-COVID world, what it looks like to actually lead with that ethic and just making sure that our neighborhoods are taken care of, that our people are taken care of, and just continuing that thing that we've always done as Native people, which is offering a viable way for everyone to learn and see what it looks like to actually come together and just take care of people and love each other and just make sure we have our needs met and do it in a joyful way, cracking jokes, and it's fun, right? It's fun to be in community in that way and just feed people and get ingredients from local farms and wherever. All right, what are we gonna do with this? We have another 3 cases of plums. All right, who's on plum duty today? And we just do it, right? And that was a beautiful thing for me to be able to witness, not only how we got through those days, but a model for this world going forward where we don't maybe hustle in the way that we had previously. Not that we don't have all the issues that surface too, but we actually have some ways forward, drawing from our collective wisdom and knowledge of all of our communities of how we can actually take care of each other when we choose to.
Excellent, yeah. We have just a few minutes left, although I would like to note this started 4 minutes late, so I might steal that back. We really want to hear from you at this point. We welcome your specific questions, but we also welcome just any thoughts or reflections that sort of went through your head as any of our speakers were discussing their work, their philosophy. So I'm not sure, yep, looks like we have a mic, so feel free.
Please raise your hand if you want us to come bring the mic to you.
Women first. Okay. Women first. No. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the panel, particularly my tribal member, Brett, for doing such a wonderful rendition of our history and culture and approach to agriculture presently. But my comment is really a follow-up on Rhonda, and I just want to make the statement that I don't think we have ever had, or in my lifetime, a better example of the expendability of workers than through the meatpacking industry. I mean, the farmers are widgets, the cattle are widgets, each meat project, piece of meat is a widget, just as the workers were treated like widgets. And it's just one of the most horrendous things that I can think that I've seen, and we need to figure out how to get beyond that. Thank you.
Oh, introduce myself. Okay. Bartlett Duran, Sand County Foundation, and that was a beautiful comment from her. Thank you. I was struck by a couple things I hear coming out of the islands, the Pacific Islands, who are suffering from climate change but had nothing to do with it, just by population base. All 3 of you represent communities that have been hammered by an industrial food system, and you come from cultures that are about social interaction and social resilience, and now you're re-suffering from environmental issues and all. And I guess seeing what work I do, the importance of finding resilience and reaching out to your community becomes paramount. And I hope my culture can learn from your cultures, because I think that is our salvation going forward. So as desperate as things can seem on your end, I fear all of us are looking to you for the solutions. That's it. Thanks.
Any other reflections?
If we don't have anything, I will, what do they always say in congressional hearings? I'll take back my time or whatever, the opposite of, I would like to ask one last question to each of our wonderful plenary speakers. And because whenever you're asking questions, whenever someone asks me questions, they never ask the question I want them to ask me. So this is your chance, and no particular order, just jump in. You're in front of a group of people heavily invested with their time, energy, money, spirit, passion in changing the food system. You as champions, as warriors, as heroes on the ground floor, what final thoughts do you want us to take with us? What do you want to say that you haven't had a chance to yet on this panel?
I guess that leaves me. I would like to say to you, those of you that have the power to make change, that you would take a long, hard look at what is going on in our systems, and that you would realize that there has to be a significant paradigm shift in order for all of us to survive, not just the haves and the have-nots. We need each of you, and we need all of us to make this work. We need the workers that are on the ground, the boots on the ground. We need those that sit in corporate offices. We need you for your direction. We need you for your input. We need you for your support. And one of the things that has to happen is the way money is distributed needs to be flipped. We have all of it at the top, but if we just take a small portion and shift it to the bottom, and it comes up, we can change the system significantly in a short amount of time.
Rhonda or Brett, not to put you on the spot.
I would just urge us to think about, I think all of us talked about it, it's all about the people. And I think sometimes people who are outside of places like rural America, or the Midwest in particular, sometimes we're in rooms with people who we then, as we think about, my gosh, those people, why do they do that? Why do they support this? Why do they vote this way? And we think about them as those people. And I think what we experience as people, certainly from my perspective, who live in the rural Midwest and who work here, and who've had a lot of generations here, I think what I would want to say is, like, these are people. And it's going to take, for us to have the kind of sustainable food system and sustainable agriculture and the food system that is going to be fair and just, for us to have that in the future, it's going to take people who live here. And that means we can't just think of people who live here as those people. These are people who are taking care of our kids, who are our home health care nurses, who are the hospice workers, who, like, even though we may not agree with them politically, they're going to be in our Sunday school class, and they're going to be the people who are praying for us when we're in the hospital and bringing us the pies. When you go to a meeting that is about saving the library, there isn't a Democrat or Republican booth you're going in. It's everybody who comes together to make those things happen. And people aren't going to live in the Midwest, and we're not going to have the ag system we want if we cede all of the farmland and all of rural America to corporate interests. We have to have people here and support the people here, and that requires deep and long-term organizing and being part of the community and listening to what people say are the problems versus saying, we have the answers for you. Because I think the answers are gonna come from the people who live and work and farm and are part of this food system every day. We just have to ask and have those conversations, listen and support and take those actions. So it's all about the people, y'all. Thanks.
So this was about 2 weeks ago. I reached out to a good friend of mine named Shawn, who I met at this point 20 years or so ago doing a lot of sacred site work. He worked with a group of spiritual leaders from tribes from all over Turtle Island and beyond, and he would convene these gatherings for young folks to connect with these elders and just learn from them on lands. And so I reconnected with him just a couple weeks ago. It had been 5 or so years, and I was sharing with him some of the work that we're doing up around White Cloud with the creation of the Iowa Tribal National Park that is composed largely of land that was recently rematriated from the Nature Conservancy. It's in the bluffs above the Missouri River, beautiful area. Some of you will have a chance to witness some of it tomorrow. And so I was kind of telling him about that, and he's like, "Oh, great. Well, how much land was it?" And I shared, and he said, "Oh, that's really great." And one of the things that I remember in the elders that he continues to support was that we would see in a lot of the stories, we would have this 500 years of loss, 500 years of loss of our languages, loss of health of our lands, and loss of health of our communities. And then there would be a point after that 500 years where it would start to mirror back the other way. And we would see our land being returned. We would see our languages returning, the health of our people, the health of our more than human people or animals, fish, plants. And that would start happening. And I feel that's largely what's happening right now. But the other thing he said too is it has to be all of it. It can't just be the rock in Lawrence, Kansas. It can't just be some of the bluffs. It can't just be the Bison Range in Montana. It has to be every last little bit of it in order for that health to fully return from what we've seen lost for the last 500 years. And it wouldn't be just for the benefit of Indigenous people. What that would actually do is it would actually benefit everyone. Because what we do, as I noted with the example for COVID, is we take care of people. And if we had the opportunity to actually lead the way forward and actually be in control, it wouldn't look like what control looks like now. It wouldn't look like what power looks like now. We wouldn't hoard it for ourselves. We wouldn't beat down the people who were below us, who were deemed other than or not as worth it. We would lift everybody up. We would lift up other people, other plants, other animals, and make sure that everybody was healthy and that everybody had an opportunity to prosper. And so that's what an Indigenous future looks like. And so seeing a lot of the work that I know a number of organizations in here are doing, whether it's Castanea, some of the work that I'm able to be part of with Regenerative Ag Foundation, is seeking to actually do that in ways. It's seeking to give some of that power back to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color-led food and farming and land health entities who are seeking to benefit everyone and everything beyond just their immediate communities, because as we know, once one community thrives, your neighbor thrives, and if we're able to see things in that connected way, like I've been talking about earlier today, it doesn't matter if your neighbor is doing poorly, or if you're doing well if your neighbor is doing poorly, right? Everybody has to be lifted up. And that's one thing that we can start to see if and when we see this return back, once we see Indigenous people leading, because we'll then be able to bring everybody along with us and give everybody else their rightful seat at or not even seat. Maybe you don't want to sit, and that'd be your autonomy to decide if you'd wanted to sit or not. So I think that's what I would offer.
Wonderful, thank you. Join me in thanking our speakers. I so appreciate your wisdom and your grace for sharing the stage today, and let's give them one more round of applause. Thank you.